Hello friends, and welcome back to this program, Books of the Book. My name is David Rodriguez, and we are so happy that you are taking this time to join us in this Bible study. And we have been studying the Gospel of John, and today we are picking up on chapter 20. So if you have a Bible near you somewhere, I invite you to grab it and open it again to chapter 20 of the Gospel of John. And with us is Dr. John Pauline. He is a Bible scholar, and he comes from Loma Linda University. Dr. Pauline, you know, we have been studying the Gospel of John. Now we are in chapter 20, and definitely it has been a lot of material to cover. In fact, we have not been able to read a verse by verse and no commentary on that. But if someone is very interested in the Gospel of John, someone's watching, really wants to know more about the material that we've been covering, or some of the material that we've skipped because of time, how can they attain that material?
Well, the good news is that because we've not been able to cover every detail of the Gospel of John, we're planning to put the script on my website, and people can access it there. And there'll be lots of Bible texts and lots of features that we haven't covered here. And that particular website is www.thebattleofarmageddon, one word, thebattleofarmageddon.com. So we hope that people take advantage of that.
And there will be no charge or anything like that?
No, it's just
no
downloadable.
Fees, no download fees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we are in chapter 20 of the Gospel of John. The last program we talked about the crucifixion, the trial of Jesus before Pilate. Give us a little bit of a review on the previous chapter so that we can now have in context chapter 20.
Well, why don't I take this opportunity maybe to quickly summarize the whole book. First of all, there's 12 chapters. The first 12 chapters are Jesus' public ministry, where he's out ministering to people in Jerusalem and the surroundings around Jerusalem, in Galilee, and he goes back and forth between those two. Then in chapter 13, Jesus moves to a private ministry just between him and his disciples. So from chapters 13 through 17, you have this private ministry where he is preparing the disciples for what life will be like after Jesus leaves. Then in chapters 18 and 19, you have the crucifixion, the trial, the crucifixion, the burial, and so on. And that sets the stage for where we are now. In chapter 20, we have moved to the resurrection of Jesus. And it's really an important turning point in the story, because without the resurrection, there would be no Christian church. The cross by itself would simply be a grave and the end of a story. But because of the resurrection of Jesus, it changes everything with regard to who Jesus is, with regard to how God looks at him. It is the heavenly court overturning Pilate's court and the religious leaders' court. And we begin to see that Jesus is much, much more. If Jesus is raised from the dead, then we too can one day be raised from the dead. If the resurrection of Jesus happened, then no miracle is impossible. I mean, that's an amazing kind of miracle. So that sets the tone for what's happening in chapter 20, and there's 4 parts in chapter 20. First of all, you have the story of some women who go to the tomb, and they find it empty, and so they rush back to the disciples and say, guess what? The tomb is empty. And Peter and John go into a foot race, and it's one of the 2 or 3 foot races in the Bible. And Peter cheats. He gets a head start, but John is the steady one, and he picks up and passes Peter, and he gets there first. And John takes a look inside the door of the tomb, doesn't see anything. Peter rushes up, and he goes right in. You know, he's the more impetuous of the two. And then the second incident is Mary evidently followed them. I don't know if she was running too, but she gets there eventually. As they leave, she stays alone at the garden there where Jesus is buried, and then she runs into, she thinks, the gardener who probably moved Jesus' body somewhere else, and finds out it is Jesus himself. Then the third story is back in the upper room. Jesus and the disciples meet together there, and he ministers to them, but Thomas isn't there. And so the fourth scene is his appearance to the disciples and Thomas. So there's a series of incidents here, 3 of which Jesus actually appears, and the first one, only the empty tomb appears.
So there are 3 appearances in the Gospel of John. How many total appearances are in the Bible?
Well, actually, there is a 4th one in chapter 21.
Okay.
So there would be 4 post-resurrection appearances of Jesus there. But the total actually is 11 when you go to the entire New Testament. And I thought it would be good to share here, so I wrote it down, make sure it would be accurate. And what I have here is that Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene. We saw that in the middle of chapter 20. He appears to Mary and some other women in Matthew 28. He appears to Peter by himself. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't have an account of that, but it's mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, and it's also mentioned in Luke 24, that Peter has seen him, one-on-one. So that we know that that occurred, but it's only referred to. Then you have the road to Emmaus, where there's 2 disciples walking along the road and Jesus joins them. That's in Luke 24. And then here in John, Jesus meets with 10 disciples, and Thomas is missing. And then he meets again with the 10 plus Thomas a week later. In chapter 21, Jesus meets with 7 fishing disciples up in Galilee. Then according to Matthew 28, he met with the 11 on a mountain and gave the Great Commission. Yeah. So that's one I think everybody knows. In the book of Acts, there's the Ascension appearance where Jesus goes up to heaven. And according to Paul, at one point Jesus met with 500 people at one time on a hillside in Galilee. That's the biggest crowd. And then he meets with James, who was the half-brother of Jesus. So that's 11 total. And you wonder, why are all of these mentioned? Why so many people? Or I suppose you could ask, why so few? But the beauty of it is the resurrection of Jesus is supported by many, many witnesses. If anybody chose to doubt the resurrection of Jesus, there were so many people who could say that they had seen him that it became very, very difficult to do. If only 2 or 3 or 5 people had seen Jesus after the crucifixion, it'd be easy to say, well, maybe they had hallucinations. Mm-hmm. But 500?
Yeah.
I mean, how many people can share a hallucination?
Right.
I've been with people who are hallucinating, and they're the only ones that can see what they're seeing and hear what they're hearing. So to say that 500 people are all hallucinating at the same time, I think that would be pretty unique.
And 500 people is a lot if you think about it. They would have a similar testimony of the resurrection of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And even if their testimonies aren't identical, I mean, that's normal. You get a group of people.
Right.
They're not going to tell the story exactly the same way. But the reality is they're not all going to be hallucinating at once.
Right.
The simple weight of that 500 to 600 people saw Jesus after his crucifixion, it tells you it's not a made-up story.
Right.
I think that's the part that comes through clearly here. But you know what? Even those witnesses are maybe not the greatest evidence of the resurrection of Jesus. Historically, the greatest evidence may well be the empty tomb. Because when you stop and think about it, that is pretty hard to explain. Why is Jesus' tomb empty? Everybody seems to agree on that. The tomb was empty, so what are the possibilities? Well, one possibility is maybe the Romans or the Jews came and stole away his body, okay? But what motive did they have to do that? How would stealing the body of Jesus help them in their case?
Right.
The reality is, if they had done that, all they had to do to refute the whole story is produce the body of Jesus. They never do. So they didn't have the body. The other option is maybe the disciples stole the body of Jesus. And in stealing the body of Jesus, then they made it appear that he'd been resurrected. Right? So that's the most plausible explanation here. But is that really likely? I mean, the disciples before the cross were a mess. You know, they were all over the map. They didn't really understand. They didn't really believe. They couldn't believe he was going to the cross. I mean, Peter pulls his sword out. Can't let this happen. No way. You know, they didn't buy the idea that Jesus was going to be crucified. So the whole thing was devastating to them. Everything seemed lost and gone. Even after he returns, they're slow to believe. You know, look at Thomas, but he's not the only one. All of the disciples are slow to believe. The women come back and they say, you know, Jesus has appeared, and I don't know about that. Peter and John come back. Well, the tomb is empty. I don't know. It's only when they see Jesus, when they touch him, when they get that full 5 sense of it, then they say, whoa, he must have been raised from the dead afterward. And by the way, while John doesn't mention it, for the disciples to steal the body means to get past a detachment of Roman soldiers. And no matter how brave Peter might be, he's not a trained soldier. And these guys were the Navy SEALs of their day. I seriously don't think that the disciples had any shot of getting the body, even if they had wanted to. Would they want to bad enough to fight their way through, you know, a whole squad of Roman soldiers? Probably not. So then comes the final question. Maybe the disciples made it all up. You know, the tomb is empty, and so they create this story that Jesus was raised from the dead. They know that he wasn't, but they create the story to keep the myth alive. Is that really likely? I don't think so. Because who would hang on to a hoax all the way through their lives, go through all kinds of torment and suffering, go to martyrdom and death for something that they knew was a lie? That just doesn't make any sense historically. So I think we can reasonably assume that the body of Jesus was in fact raised from the dead, and that that's the only historical explanation that makes sense of all the details that we have.
And not only one disciple to hold on to a hoax like that, but as we were saying, you know, at least just a little bit more than 500 people.
Yeah.
And we were also talking about the resurrection of Lazarus and how they wanted to, the Jews wanted to kill, they were looking for an opportunity to kill Lazarus because it was also convincing of the power of God. And so I would suppose they would have to do a lot of planning, you know, for those 500 witnesses as well, and that is very impossible.
And, you know, unless one has the assumption that a resurrection is impossible on the very face of it, and that God doesn't exist and so on, then one would have to come up with some idea of how this story occurred without a real resurrection. But if you believe in God and believe in the possibility, the resurrection of Jesus is as solid historically, evidence-wise, as anything else we know. Why don't we get into the story?
Sure.
Take chapter 20 and read verses 1 through 9, and when you're done with that reading, we should probably go to a break.
Yes. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they've laid him." Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes lying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen clothes lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but folded together in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who came to the tomb first went in also, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise again from the dead.
Okay. Why don't we take that moment here and move toward a break.